This is episode number 155. This is part 2 of my interview with the amazing T. Allen Lawson.
This is the PleinAir Podcast with Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called plein air, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plain air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhoads.
Thank you, Jim Kipping, and welcome to the PleinAir Podcast. My name is Eric, and I'm honored that you're here and spending time with me. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And again, Happy New Year. I think I can continue to say that until at least the end of the month. I'm back from a week-long workshop. I've always wanted to do a workshop with David LaFell and Sherry McGraw, and I decided to take a week off and do it. So that's what I did last week, and it was amazing. Scottsdale Artist School is amazing. They were amazing. I was there all week, and I think I left as a better painter. Boy, I hope so. Anyway, they are absolutely the best teachers, so props to David and Sherry and team. I should also let you know that we've had kind of a run on seats over the Christmas holiday. There are fewer seats available now than there were for the PleinAir convention, and that's coming up in May in Denver. I got to tell you, I ran into some people at the workshop who've attended several years in a row, and they tell me they are addicted, that they come back year after year because it's never the same. And it's the highlight of the year. One person said it's kind of like Thanksgiving, where they come and see their painter family every year. Anyway, if you come back, it's different. It's always different. It's never the same 2 years in a row, never the same faculty, and never the same people on stage, never the same experiences. And of course, the painting locations are different. You can check it out at pleinairconvention.com. Of course, if you've never been, good time to come. pleinairconvention.com. Speaking of a run on things, another thing we had a run on was these things we call value specs, which over Christmas, the red glasses, you put them on and they help you see perfect values. I used to hold a red piece of plexiglass in front of my eyes, but I was tired of, losing my hand and sitting it down, because I had to hold it up, put it down, hold it up. Now I just put these glasses on. I paint my entire underpainting with them, or sometimes first layer anyway, and then I take them on and off and compare how I'm doing against the scene versus the values on my painting. And I'll tell you, it's amazing how much I had gotten it wrong before I started using them. A lot of people are getting them. Anyway, they're value specs. You can get them at paintbynote.com. Coming up after the interview, I'm going to be answering some art marketing questions in the Marketing Minute. Let's get right to the part 2 of the interview with T. Allen Lawson. T. Allen Lawson, welcome back to the PleinAir Podcast. For those people who are listening, we were getting so much good information in the first one, we decided during the same recording session to do a part 2. So, Tim, are you with me?
I'm still here.
Outstanding.
I'm not sure any of your listeners will be, but I'm still here.
Well, that's all that matters, really, is I guess. Well, we've had a fascinating conversation. If you happen to be listening to this as part 2, just know that part 1 is something you want to listen to as well. So I want to start out with a couple of things that you kind of touched on earlier. When you and I were hanging out together, when you were living in Austin here, I came over to your studio and I was fascinated the continual reliance on color charts. And I asked you about it at the time, and you talked to me about the importance of color charts. Will you kind of go into that now so that we can understand color charts?
Well, I've taught a number of workshops in the past. I haven't taught in the last several years just because of commitments and my painting time. I haven't been able to take the time, but in one of my workshops, we had to do color charts when I was at the American Academy in Chicago, but they never told us the value of it. It was just an assignment. And because I was a stupid kid then, I just did the assignment to fulfill it and get the instructor off my back. And I didn't see the value of them, and he didn't convey the value of them. And it wasn't until I came across George Carlson and saw how George uses his color chart that I saw the real merit of it. And so I know a lot of people, a lot of painters will have a certain palette. They'll have their colors, whether it's a 3-color limited palette that, Zorn used, or the limited palette that Ned Jacob used, which is going to be kind of the 3 primary colors in white, or a full Rubens palette, or whatever it is. I probably have about 13 or 14 colors that are on my palette the majority of the time. But I probably have another 10 to maybe 15 colors that I might use occasionally. And for every color that I have, and a lot of times it's, if I'm back in New York and I go to Vasari and I see a new color, or sometimes it's just, that color's got a great name to it. I'm interested, I'll take it, and I'll make a new color chart. And basically what it is it's every color I have a chart for every color. And then that's intermixed with the other primary colors on my palette, the other colors that are normally on there, and white, and only those 2. So let's take warm sepia extra, which is a favorite color of mine. And so I'll just take that right out of the tube and make a little square, and then tint that out in white. And then I might do the same with the next color, ivory black, and then Indian red and Indian yellow and the cadmiums. And so there are only 2 color mixtures, and then tint it out. And I tint mine out to about 8 values on my chart. And they're small enough, they're large enough that I can mix the colors. I think there are 14 colors going across and 8 coming down. So is that 112 colors, I think?
So I just want to get some clarity on this for the people who are completely confused. Make sure I understand this. You're taking your palette of 14 colors, normal colors, and let's say you're using a rogue color like warm sepia extra. You will then do a mixture of warm sepia extra in with that color, each color on your palette, and then you will make a value scale in each row. So you take the mixture, let's say, of warm sepia and red, and then you would do light to dark by mixing white in. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's I think the confusing part is that I have one chart, an individual chart for every color on my palette, as well as other, some of them. My charts are 19 colors across and 8 values down. And the key to it is you're only mixing 2 colors and white. And never add a third color, because then if you start to add a third or a fourth color, at least for the color charts, when you get back to the studio, you can never get those percentages just right.
So
if you only have 2 colors.
How do you get consistency? Do you make each one a 50-50 mix?
No, and that's the thing to it. So say I'm my ivory black, and a lot of people are told, don't put black on your palette if you're a landscape painter or you're painting outside. And to me, that's total nonsense. One of my most beautiful grays of looking at it is my ivory black. And then the difference between ivory black and lamp black, or ivory black and Mars black, those 3 blacks are completely different, and they give you a completely different range of grays. The problem with why I think people tell you, or instructors will tell you not to put black on, because unless you're disciplined, you look outside, you see a dark value, and you think, oh, that's black, and I'll just put that in out of laziness. But black will create some of the most beautiful grays imaginable. So say I have my ivory black chart, and ivory black and Indian red are a beautiful mixture. and I'll mix those two. But that, if you put it at 50-50, Indian red is so overpowering that you wouldn't even know you had ivory black mixed in it. So you have to be able to find a subtlety. But the ivory black and Indian red mixture on my ivory black chart will be different than my Indian red and ivory black on my Indian red chart.
Yeah.
So they can't be the same.
So, but the question becomes then, the color chart there is to remind you of what's possible, and then you got to figure out the mixture. So do you document, the percentage of a color you put into another color, or you just kind of eyeball it and then?
You kind of eyeball it, and you want all of those colors on your, on the ivory black chart or the warm sepia chart to be on the warm sepia side. And if you really get excited about these color charts, another fun thing to do, and I've only done it with it, and you have to realize that it only gives you an example of the chart. Even though I have 19 colors going across and 8 down, let me see how many. 72. I have, 156 colors on each one of my charts. And it kind of looked like a fan book out of the hardware paint store. But I carry, a number of these out. And people think, would you mix me a set? And I think, well, no, it takes me too long, but you defeat the purpose if you're not mixing it yourself.
Right.
But you have to be aware, and the other thing to give you a full range of spectrum is if you took, say you took your ivory black and Indian red, and that could be an example. It could be any color that you have on any two colors. It's usually, it's the most fun, or you see the biggest range if you have a really warm color and a really cool color, say cobalt blue and cat orange. And on the left side could be cat orange, and that's tinted out 6, 8, 10 values. On the far right side is pure cobalt, tinted out, the 6, 8, 10 values. And then you try to mix right in the middle, try to mix that wonderful neutral gray. And then everything moving left gets slightly warmer toward the orange, and everything moving left or right gets slightly cooler toward the cobalt. That would give you, you could do it any number. You could go 200 colors or 156 colors of variations with only using 2 colors in white. You would have a full understanding, or a fuller understanding, of what those colors, what their possibility is, what the range of that color could be, or those color combinations. And by doing this, I've learned so much, and it gives you so much freedom, because before I had done these color charts, you go out and it's a sunny day and you're looking up at a deep blue sky, and you're trying to think, is that ultramarine blue, or is that cobalt blue, or is it cerulean blue, or a variation of that? And, I would have never thought to mix cobalt and cerulean together. But on my color charts, they're there, and it creates a completely different blue than either cerulean or cobalt. And it's that way with all of the colors. And so to me, I probably have 38 color charts now that I've done. And they take a little while. They're labor intensive, but the knowledge that you get and the understanding, I use them like a visual dictionary, much like I think an author or a writer uses the English dictionary. And they're invaluable to me in the field, but I also use them in the studio when I want to lay out a painting. I can put 4 or 5, spread them out on the floor, and I can see it's not the full range of color, but I get to see at least a pretty good percentage of what the range of that color is. It's already mixed up in front of me, both values and different nuances. The difference between mixing say, an earth color with cadmium yellow medium and cadmium lemon yellow, they're subtle, but they're drastically different. And so you can, in your painting, you can kind of see how I want to tone this. And, so I'm going to have a cool winter painting, and I want the sky to be slightly warmer. I can lay out a couple color charts, and I think, my Indian red mixed with this lemon yellow gives me a warmer than color without being too garish. So I use them that way a lot. It's kind of like going through the dictionary and searching for the right word.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. Okay, I want to move on to the next thing, because in our notes in preparation, you said something about having two viewing planes, and that's something I don't understand. Can you talk to us about that?
Well, and I don't know what else that, I really haven't thought a lot, or that probably isn't the right description, but I'm fascinated toward paintings that when you're viewing them, say when I go to a museum, I usually don't start on the right or left wall and just walk around the wall at 6 or 8 feet away. I walk to the middle of the room, and we'll kind of do a 360. And whether I'm at the Metropolitan or one of the galleries in New York or the Prado in Spain, and in any given space, there will be certain paintings that kind of jump off the wall, or that speak to you, that grab your attention. And there might be 2 or 3 in any room. Those will be the paintings that I go up and investigate a little bit more, instead of going around and looking at every painting. But when you view something from, say, 20 to 30 feet away, it looks one thing. And where it first really stopped me in my tracks, at the Sterling Francis Clark Museum in Williamstown, Mass., they had a wonderful exhibition called Like Breath on Glass. There's a fabulous catalog that was printed in conjunction with it. And in the opening room, they had, I believe, 3, there may have been a 4th, Winslow Homer, I'm sorry, not Winslow Homer, Whistler, nocturne paintings. And I stood 10 or 12, 15 feet back from them, and everything was visible. They're subtle and misty, but there's a bargeman and the light in the back. And I would start to walk toward the painting, and I would get about 3 feet away. And it was so staggering that I thought that somebody was playing an optical trick on me. I thought somehow they were changing the painting, because what I had been viewing, the little boatman in the back of the barge, completely disappeared. And I would start to step backwards, and I would get about 8 to 10 feet, and it would reappear.
Really?
And I kept doing it, and I was staggered of how Whistler wasn't using a lot of thick, abstract paint. It was just these thin veils of how he could create that, and how intriguing it was for the viewer to have something just completely disappear when you got up close to it. And I would think it would be the opposite, that I'd be able to see it up close, and then it would disappear as I got farther back, but that wasn't the case. And so ever since seeing that exhibition for the first time, and seeing that, I've been fascinated by work that does that. And so I purposely, and it's one of the things that I'm concentrating on the most when I'm working on my paintings, is to try to give the viewer a different experience from, whether that's 15 or 20 or 30 feet, depending on how big the gallery is, or hanging in your house. And looking at it, I hope it's a completely different painting, engages different senses when it's looked at from 2 feet to, say, I like to get up to a painting that, 6 inches away and put my nose practically on the canvas. What you thought was a tree all of a sudden is just these woven colors, or just a smear. But back from a given distance, it looks like a fully rendered representational tree or a cow or any subject in your painting. And so that's the work that I'm naturally drawn to, or I have become drawn to, whether it's in a museum or a gallery. And that's what I spend a great deal of time trying to create in mine. And I don't, that's probably not a good definition to describe that, but just think of it as different planes and viewing planes or viewing distances. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, makes sense. Talk to me about some of the tools that you're using. You use mirrors when you paint.
A mirror?
Yeah.
Yeah, I always have a mirror because I have a tendency, for whatever reason, things in my drawings will lean toward the left. They always have a mirror is a great thing to have in your studio, so that you can look at it in reverse, which gives a fresh perspective. With the technology today, I know you can, with computers, at just a click of a button, you can flip an image. So if you take a photograph, you don't have a mirror, you can put it on your computer and flip it to a mirror. That has basically the same thing. I also the studio here in Wyoming has such fabulous light that I don't need it, but I have a Northlit studio in Maine that I designed, but Mark Daly, who is a painter in Denver, Colorado, an artist in Denver, Colorado, who is, I think, if he's not a genius, he's awfully close to it. He has a big mirror that was given to him by, he was working on a series of dancing, ballet dancers, and one of his students gave him one of those great big, dance studio mirrors, and he put it on the south side of his studio to reflect the north light back onto his canvas. And so in Maine, I've done the same thing, but it was Mark's brilliance, because a lot of times if you have north light coming in, it kind of transfers and it doesn't get as bright as it's going across. If you're working on a large canvas or something, one side of your canvas will be brighter than the other. You always struggle with artificial light, trying to get the same temperatures. But if you take a big mirror and put it opposite your north window, it's reflecting exactly the same north light coming in. And so it solves all of your lighting problems. It also gives you about an extra 45 minutes or an hour in the evening to have that reflected light coming back into your surface, kind of like putting a big reflector out in this, and the Indians used a signal or something shiny, and they can send it off. But that's another use of a mirror. I do use a mirror for both the corrective purposes in drawing, and to see it backwards for the composition. But in Maine, I also have a big one that I use just to enhance the natural north light.
And are you also using a camera obscura?
No, I don't. I would not be opposed to it. I know when we went over to see Tim Jennison, that was still one of the most interesting afternoons I've ever spent.
Well, why don't you tell everybody about that, because they don't know what the heck we're talking about. For some reason, I thought after that trip, maybe you started doing that.
No, I haven't, but I was, Tim Jennison was an entrepreneur, brilliant mind that was, and I don't believe everything that he said. I think he said that, and he was a lighting technician or doing something with lighting instruments that realized that it's only through technology that you can see the brightest spot or the most intensive spot of color. I disagree with that aspect of it. I think he's probably right for the general person, but I would like to argue that if you have a white wall and you have a bright spot, I could tell you probably within a couple inches of what the exact brightest spot of. But
let me stop you there. What we're talking about is that Tim Jennison did the movie Tim's Vermeer, and he made the case that Vermeer used a camera obscura And he did so by constructing a complete set of the woman at the harpsichord. And he even went to the extent of building the windows and making everything almost perfect. And then he, not being a painter, painted the painting with a camera obscura 1 inch at a time over the course of a couple of years. Tim Lawson and I went down to his studio where he did this film and visited the set and spent time with him. And that's what we're referring to, right?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Eric. I have a tendency to fly off in different tangents, and I think it is a film that if you're interested in the arts, and even if you're not, it should be seen. It's so convincing that I think it would be very difficult to argue that Vermeer didn't use this camera obscura or camera lucinda, I think it was called at the time. I've also been told that the man who invented the convex lens lived in the same block that Vermeer did. To me, I think artists more than anything are curious, and it's our curiosity that leads us to want to be a painter a lot of the times. And so to think that there's some new technology or something that's out on the horizon that artists at any given time aren't interested in is an absurd thought to me.
Well, the great debate, it's this great debate about, are there tools that you shouldn't be using because you're not being true to the form of art? The big argument about that movie was, well, of course he knew how to draw. Well, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. But, of course, the diehards are saying, well, you have to know how to draw. You have to know how to craft things properly. What I hear you saying is, hey, why not use every tool to your benefit? Is that true?
If you're using them as a tool and not as a crutch,
yeah.
Then if they become a crutch and then it becomes a detriment to your work or to the creative process. If it becomes a tool, then I think absolutely. And to me, the argument isn't whether Vermeer used it or not. I think Tim Jennison in this movie gives evidence that it would be very difficult not to argue against rationally. I know we live in a world now that if you don't like something, you just call it fake news and write it off. But I also am given a couple lectures, and I use the Vermeer, The Lady in Blue Reading the Letter. There's a map on the upper left-hand corner. And if you look at a painting that was done, I believe 4, maybe 6 years earlier, called an officer with the lady laughing, and I don't know if that's the exact title of it, but there's the exact same map, but it's in full color because the painting with the officer and the lady laughing is a much brighter painting. It's much more colorful, and the map is full color. If you look at it and you compare those two maps, the lady in blue reading the letter, she's got this dark blue, beautiful cobalt blue, and everything else is this kind of muted yellow ochre around her. And so to me, it doesn't matter what he was using to try to create that. He's still making artistic decisions. In the 1600s, when Vermeer was painting, you couldn't run down to Kinko's and have a full-colored map or a sepia map painted or printed. They were all done by hand. And so in my thinking, Vermeer, he only had one map, and I think it was probably a full-colored map. But if he had put all that color in with the lady in blue reading the letter, it would be a total distraction from that painting. So he's still making abstract artistic thoughts or decisions, thinking, I'm going to mute that. I'm going to play that map down because I want it to be more harmonious in this painting. And so whether he's using camera obscura or not, as Tim Jennison does in his movie, he's still making he's still making decisions, and he's not a slave to the tool. He's still able to make a decision and say, I'm going to change the value of this, or I'm going to change the color of this. There's also, in the lady reading the letter, there's a chair against the wall, and in the position where the angle of the lighting comes in, it would cast a shadow behind her. And I think he's opted to completely take that shadow off, because on the back side of the woman is this wonderful abstract dark silhouette of her skirt and her figure. So he's not just copying, as Tim does Tim Jennison does in his Vermeer's painting. He's making decisions, and I think though Tim Jennison does a very convincing job rendering what's in front of him, they're not Vermeer's, and that's one of the things that decided Vermeer is using the camera, but he's not just rendering exactly everything that he sees. He's making decisions. He's making artistic decisions. And so whether you are making those decisions while you're using photography, whether you're using camera obscura, whether you're painting directly from nature, there are so many painters that are painting out plein air that are not organizing and thinking beyond what they're doing. They're just rendering what's in front of them. And to me, that's no different than taking a photograph and going inside your studio where you have not fighting the elements and rendering from a photograph. If you're outside painting directly from life, you should be, and you have to be, making decisions of orchestrating, arranging, rearranging, and probably the most important, editing. If it's not adding to your overall central theme of your painting, then it's distracting from it, and it should be taken out, whether it's in front of you or not.
So how much creative license will you use when you're out plein air painting and creating a study? Will you completely change the colors, the light, will you kind of craft something that is what you think you want it to be versus just trying to record what you're seeing? It sounds to me like that's what you're saying.
Well, I'm not all that of a creative person. So when I'm outside, and if I'm gathering information, I'm trying to get the accurate information, with the color relationship, I think is where photography misses the most. The cameras and with digital photography, it's gotten so much better, but it still doesn't capture the relationships of color that you're able to observe directly from life. And I don't think it ever will. We've gotten awfully close, but so if I'm out getting, whether I'm painting or observing or I have my color charts, I'm really just trying to get information. And the last 8 or 10 years or so, if I'm actually painting, I might just put, I'm not worried about the drawing or the composition. I might just put bars of color next to each other that I think are capturing that color relationship. The color of the sky on the horizon toward the top of the hillside. And it might just be one brushstroke or two brushstrokes trying to capture that subtlety. Then I can go back the next day or the next week and do a drawing, for the next week or the next month. I might go out and do a detailed drawing of that hillside. And the more time that you spend observing, whether it's one specific thing or one general thing, the more I think you become emotionally involved in it. And that's another thing that we haven't talked about, but it's that emotional connection with your subject matter that I think is one of the ingredients between art and painting.
So how do you know when you're there? I mean, do you obviously, it's like, stop the car, I have to paint that, and it's something that you really respond to?
Yeah, I think first of all, you have to be drawn to it. You have to respond to it. If it's not an exercise or an assignment that's given to you in school or in a workshop, there should be some emotional connection. It's an extremely difficult thing that we're all trying to do if you don't have that emotional response to it, I think you defeat yourself right from the beginning. But I think, not all painting has it. I think it's one of those essential ingredients for art. And we talked about a little earlier. I place a big difference between what is art and what is painting. And there are a couple things. I think emotion has to be in it. There has to be something of the painter or the creator. I spend a lot of time, there has to be decisions made. For you can't just go out and render what's in front of you, and that will never be art, no matter how well you accomplish that, because you're just rendering. There's very little of yourself, of the creator, being put into it. And I think a lot of what we see being done today is painting, and there are some extremely good painters, but they aren't crossing that bridge to art, to the other side, where art exists.
Talk to me.
And I liken it.
Oh, go ahead.
I liken it this way: that if any of us enjoy going to the theater, and if we've ever had the opportunity to go to the last rehearsal, the full dress rehearsal, everybody from the ticket takers to the choreographers to the director to all the principal actors and even the extras, they know exactly what they have to do during the last dress rehearsal. And if we had the opportunity to see that and then come back the next night on opening night, it would be a totally different experience. And since everybody's in the performance knows what they're doing on the final dress rehearsal, what's the only thing different between the final dress rehearsal and opening night? The audience,
right?
Which I think plays an integral part in art. It's not what is hanging on the wall that can be defined as art. It's not the printed ink on a page in a great literary classic, or the musical notes printed on the page. It's the interpretation that happens between the viewer and what they're seeing or what they're reading or what they're hearing. That, to me, it's that indefinable space between the listener or the viewer and what's hanging on the wall. That is what art is. But unless what's hanging on the wall has had some emotional connection with the creator, then there's very little for the viewer to take, or there's less from the viewer to take away. So a viewer can look at a fully rendered piece and they can be awed by the execution of it, the artistic execution, but unless there's an emotional connection from the creator, there will be very little for the viewer to take away. And that, to me, that's the difference between art and painting.
So talk to me about composition, because you're the king of composition. Everybody's always
Eric,
looking...
I'm not the king. I'm not even the king of my own day to day. I struggle just as much. I'm the king of nothing, Eric.
All right,
Thank you for the compliment.
As the king of nothing, talk to us about composition. Help us understand some of the decisions you're making about composition and what makes a really great composition for you.
Well, I think a lot of times that when I've taught, or when I'm approaching my own painting, is that the important thing to ask yourself, and to me, it's the first thing I ever ask. I guess after we get over that, kind of electronic shock when we see something that inspires us, and it happens. It's kind of like being hit by a mild bolt of lightning. But then you start to analyze and you think, well, all right, why did I slam on the brakes of the car here? Or as I'm sitting, because a lot of times it's not when you're in a car going 65 miles down the highway that you see something, but it might just be when you're walking on a hike or when you're just sitting out in nature. that you think, all right, why am I drawn to that mountain over there? And I remember one of the workshops I was teaching down in Arizona. I stopped, and when I walk up to somebody, I'll say, all right, what are you painting here? And it sounds so obvious, but there's much more to it. It's not meant as a frivolous question. It's meant to try to get them thinking. And the wonderful woman said, I just love the color of those distant hills back there. And then the relationship of, I love how that saguaro cactus comes in front. And she took one of the mountains, the Superstitious Mountains, they were 35, 40 miles away. And before she ended the sentence, she was painting, she had a yucca plant that was about 6 feet away from us in the front, or a cactus in the front. And I tried to explain to her that everything that she mentioned, the 6 or 7 things that she mentioned, were all worthy of a great painting, but not all on the same canvas. So if you're drawn to that distant mountain, then you have to think of it almost like composing a play, and you have to that's your painting, and then you have to ask yourself, is this little cactus 6 feet away from me important? Is it adding to those mountains or distracting to it? And there's never a finite answer. You could argue, well, I want to put that cactus in the painting because it will show the distance. Then it has value of being in your painting. But if you're painting it just because it's there, then that's not the reason to put it in. And so I think, and for me, when I'm working on a composition, I'll do a number of thumbnails, and I have a general idea, but then where to place everything is, what proportion is it going to be? A square canvas, a rectangle canvas, a horizontal? If so, how long or how high? And I'll do all kinds of different thumbnails, and they're really just doodles. And right now I have a painting of 5 mule deer up on a hillside with some sagebrush going up to it, and that's the subject matter. But from a compositional standpoint, it's a winter scene, so it's the sagebrush, as I mentioned earlier, just becomes darker elements against the lighter snow. And so I try to move those in a pattern in size and scale as they recede up the hillside, where they'll lead the viewer's eye to the lead buck mule deer. Now, if you do it in a really obvious way, where it looks unnatural, you can't have just a swath where it looks like somebody's, or you can, but it doesn't look natural, where it's just come out and mown a spot or arranged them where it's obvious, then I think it becomes trite and you're in kind of an affected composition. I also think of it in the temperature of the painting, whether it's warm or cool. And since this is primarily a cool color, a cool painting, then you can, I'll add warmth to the sky. So right now it's kind of a light peachy yellow, which I think is a nice complement to the rich blue mountain that's behind it. And then, so those are the thoughts that I have. And it really, to me, it doesn't matter whether the blue is a mountain or the side of a truck. It's just a place that allows me to put a shot of a cold or cool color in a painting. I've also, people will tell you never put anything in the middle of your canvas. And, looking at a lot of the Russian painters at the turn of the century, whether it's Zach Leviton or Shishkin or the great teacher Repin, the Russians were terrific about putting something in the middle of their canvas.
But they made it work.
But they made it work, and they do it so skillfully that you're not aware of putting that your subject matter or that the canvas has been divided in two. Now, and there are times where I have two canvases right now where I've measured off and I've split my canvas horizontally right in the middle, to the quarter of an inch, right in the middle, because anytime you have 50-50, it creates a calmness. You're not quite sure what you want to look at. If you have something, 90% dark with 10% light, that's a dramatic piece. There's a lot of energy in there. Your eye will always go toward the minority, or if you have a dark hue painting, dark valued painting, your eye will instantly go to those light areas of it. And knowing that, you can put those light areas anywhere, or the opposite. If you have a high key painting, say it's a snow scene with sagebrush in it, the sagebrush becomes the darker elements of it. And if you have a huge snow field where 90% of your canvas is the snow, all of a sudden those dark elements, the sagebrush, become really important. So where are you going to put those 3 or 4 little dots for sagebrush? You can move them anywhere. And if you think of them as not sagebrush, as I mentioned earlier, that is rooted and grown and they're really tough to go out and pull up, but you think of them just as an abstract dark shape that has a certain size and an edge, you can move those anywhere. You can put them up at the top of the canvas. There's a wonderful wildlife painter named Ron Kingswood. He paints more than just wildlife, but he is a fabulous. He's a master at composition, because he'll take a big canvas and he'll just place his animals. A lot of times they'll just be on the edge, a quarter of a bird coming in or out of the canvas, and that's his whole painting. They're hard to turn away from. They're so compelling. So that's how I think about abstracting composition, both in value of light and dark. And again, let me say, if you have a high-keyed or a light painting, you design with the darker elements of it. Your eye will naturally go 100% of the time. Your eye will go to the minority of it. So if it's a high-key painting, your eye goes to the darker areas. If it's a dark painting, your eye will go to the lighter elements of it. And knowing that, you can put those lighter elements anywhere that you feel is an exciting or calming part of it.
Let's talk about learning painting, because there's a lot of people who, literally hundreds of thousands of people now who are listening to this, who are discovering painting. They Googled something and this came up as a podcast, and they've started listening with people literally all over the world in dozens and dozens and dozens of countries. It's always the question that I always get, and that is, how do I learn? So if you had to go through a process that some of it was accidental, some of it was exposure to the right teachers, but if you had to reinvent learning today, knowing what you know, knowing what someone has to go through, how would you define the process, and what is the best possible way to kind of take yourself to the highest level possible? And is that quickly? Is that over long periods of time? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think, to me, I think as in my observation, and I think it's commonly known that drawing is the foundation of all representation art that we're talking about. The abstract expressionists, or the banana duct tape to the wall at the last big Florida biennial. That's something that we could discuss and have all kinds of conversations at. But as for representational, traditional painting, from Renaissance on, drawing, I think, is not only the foundation, but it gives you the freedom to if you can draw well. And drawing is really a discipline of training your hand-eye coordination. Seeing the big shapes and then breaking it down to all the tiny little nuances of to craft something, to draw it well. And doesn't mean it has to be drawn exactly, but it has to be drawn well. And I think that's the easiest. You can take through with discipline studies, you can learn to draw rather quickly. If you really focus at it, you can become a good draftsman in, a year, year and a half, 2 years. I mean, you might not be Leonardo or, Ang or Antonio Lopez Garcia, Ned Jacobs, some of the great draftsmen, but you will be able to draw to explore the remaining of your craft. And then I would think concentrate on value, which value and mixing color kind of go hand in hand. Value just being the light and dark structure of your color. When you get into color, you get into hue, intensity, gradations, and that gets a little more, challenging. And I think the hardest part, or the part that, and I'm not sure it can be taught. I think it can be enhanced, but I don't know if it can be taught like mixing color or drawing is seeing. And by seeing both your observations in life, but more importantly in this discussion, what you choose to paint. And I think that can be enhanced by exposing yourself, whether through publications or the best case is always to go to the museums and see the originals, because as we talked about before, when you're looking at a reproduction, so much of what's in the original is lost, whether it's the grid work or nail hole in an Antonio Lopez Garcia or the fabulous paint texture in a George Carlson original that you don't see in the reproduction. And that's kind of how I would lay it out. I would spend a lot of time drawing. I've been drawing more in the last 10 years of my career than I had at any of the 30 years previously. There's something about drawing that there's an intimacy in drawing that I don't get necessarily when I'm painting. Occasionally you'll get it, I don't know, Eric, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the simplicity of materials where you have a sheet of paper and a simple range of pencils, or if it's the lack of color that has already removed us one step from reality or one step from nature, or a combination. But there's an intimacy that I find in drawing that I don't get a lot of time when I'm painting. And I think if you're starting out from the beginning, drawing from life, whether it's, a simple still life subject, a vase or a plate. I mean, one of my favorite drawings of Antonio Lopez Garcia is a half-eaten meal on a dinner plate with the fork and then it goes back to, it doesn't have to be a view of the Grand Canyon or the Teton Mountains to be a masterpiece. In fact, it rarely is something. The masterpieces that come to mind for me are pedestrian, everyday subjects that the artist has taken his interpretation, his or her interpretation of it, and filtered it through their lifetime experience and created something that, haunts us. Think of Andrew Wyeth, who painted for over 80 years, but he really painted only 2 locations for much of his life, the Kerner Farm in Pennsylvania and the Olson property in Maine. And he rarely, if ever, repeated himself. But he was able to spend so much, imbue so much of himself at both of those locations that his emotional connection to them is, to me, the first thing that comes across in his paintings.
Makes sense.
And one of the last workshops I taught in Maine, I would structure it where I rent a van because I found, whether we're driving 20 minutes or a half an hour, 40 minutes to the location, if I'm in one car and all the students are in the rest of their cars, that would be 40 minutes of missed opportunity to have a conversation. And so, as much as I try to get people to carpool, I would be able to get some private residence and locations and stuff. And where parking wasn't, made for 12 cars, but everybody wants their own stuff, which is understandable. So we'd show up a class and there'd be, if not 12 cars, we'd pare it down to 10. And so I started to get a big van where everybody was, they had, if they wanted to go to the location, they had to ride into it. And then I would go back, we'd go to a location on Monday or Tuesday, and then we'd come back to the same location later in the week to just kind of get people to think that if you see it a second or third time or the 100th time, you might see something new. And there's the Ridge Church going down toward Port Clyde and the peninsula. And N.C. Wyatt did a wonderful painting of it. Andrew Wyatt did a couple of his graveyard scenes from this. And the subject matter is endless. And we went on a Monday afternoon, and we went back on Thursday or Wednesday morning, I think. And one of the women in the class, as we pulled up to the parking lot, said, "We're back here again? Uh-huh. We painted this the other day." And I got out and I looked at it and I said, I love this spot. I lived in Maine for 8 or 9 years. I try to get down here once a month. Sometimes I don't, but I get here at least 10 times a year. And I am for 8 years, and I am just now, after being here close to 100 times, I'm just now starting to see the potentials for paintings here. And I said, if you exhausted all the potentials here on Monday afternoon, you should teach this workshop. And I handed her the van keys. She didn't talk to me the rest of the week, but I hope it demonstrated the point that there's much more to it than just rushing to a spot, doing a 2 or 3 hour painting, and then moving on to the next spot. This isn't, it's not a road race to see how much ground we can cover.
Well, I think
to me, there's much more to it.
I think that a great workshop is dumping people into an alley and saying, you got to do something within 10 or 15 feet of here. Find beauty. See what you can do with it. Because you can find it everywhere if you really look. Like Antonio Lopez Garcia. I mean, he did these beautiful paintings of his sink.
Yeah, absolutely. Or those drawings of his studio interiors, whether it's the back door, they verge on nasty places. I mean, a couple of his bathroom scenes, I wouldn't feel comfortable going and using the facilities. And yet he's depicted it with such emotional connection that they're hard to turn away from. And even when you are able to turn away from it, they still, it's like they're painted on the inside of your eyelids. You can't get them out of your head once you've seen it. To me, that's a great work of art. And how many other times do we just see a beautiful painting, and by the time we exit the gallery, we have very little memory of it.
So Tim, you've had some wonderful experiences as a painter throughout your career. One that comes to mind is you painted the White House Christmas card. And I think you actually painted with the president at one point. Well, I don't know if he was president at the time. Tell us about that.
Well, I did that card the last year there in the White House. It was a remarkable experience in the sense that I was able to go to the White House, spend an entire day. I spent a good portion of it up on the Truman balcony, which is only accessible from the residential second floor of the White House. The story was that I met with Mrs. Bush, who makes the decision. There's no competition or anything for it. My wife had written her second book, and we were having a mutual friend gave a book party in Dallas, Texas, and we had all gone out to dinner the night before, and I sat next to a woman named Pamela Nelson. And I said, "Pamela, what are you doing?" She said, "Oh, I'm an artist and a painter." I said, "Oh, that's terrific, where he works." And she told me she'd done some wonderful paintings in one of the malls in Dallas, these color fields that were extremely interesting and intriguing, these color relationships. And she turned to me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm a painter, mostly, representational and stuff." And it turned out that Pamela was one of Mrs. Bush's childhood friends from elementary school on, and they were still very close. And I believe Pamela was the one that introduced Mrs. Bush to my work. And as it happened, you just get a call, an assistant at the time, and I came in and she said, "You got a call from the White House," which I burst out laughing. And I, right, "Oh, really? What they want?" She said, "They didn't say, they just said they'd call back." And so when they did call back, my immediate thought was, I have a couple of really good friends that like nothing more to play jokes. And right. I thought, well, which one of them, came up with this idea knowing that I'd probably fall for it. And so even when I was on the phone with the White House, I was curt, and because I didn't believe it, I thought it was some joke, and I still ran through. And I was probably on, it seemed like it quite a while. It's probably, 10, 12 seconds when I really realized that, my gosh, this really could be the White House. And so I spent the next 40 seconds trying to apologize and grovel that I wasn't a complete ass that I had just come off to be. And I went to the White House. I had known that Jamie Wyeth had painted a couple scenes, I believe one for President Reagan and one for President Bush 42. But other than that, I didn't do a lot of research. I didn't want to go with any preconceived ideas. And so I met with Mrs. Bush in the morning, and she asked if there's anything that I wanted to see or I had any ideas. And I said I kind of have a blank slate. I asked if she had any ideas, and she said that she and George, or the president, had been out on the balcony the evening before, and they thought it was a remarkable view. And she asked if I'd like to see it, and I said, of course. And so we walked out, and it was just one of those rare times where somebody else's influence, and it happened to click, and I was able to, I could see it. I could see the composition that I wanted to do. And I asked if it was possible to come back up and do a couple detailed drawings and take some notes. And so she had a previous engagement, but she made it where I could come back up, and I was on the residential level, which I felt was kind of by myself. I'm sure there are guards everywhere, but I was sitting outside, and I was asked before she left that if I heard cars down below the balcony not to approach the balcony, because they didn't want anybody from up above looking down the Secret Service. And I heard the car pull in, and I sat back. I was tempted to creep up to the railing and look over, but the next thing I know, and I think like most of us when we're working, time just kind of disappears. The next thing I knew, I'd hear this, "Who the hell is on my balcony?" And I look over, and it was the president. And then I thought, well, that's funny. That guy's a pretty good imposter. And then I realized that I was on the balcony and that I really was the president. And the next thing that went through me is I thought, oh my God, nobody's told him. And I felt like I had a sniper pinpoint on me, and that was going to be the end of it. It was very quickly, he burst out laughing, and I jumped up, my drawing flew, my pencils went all over. And they had given me a chair, but I was using the chair as an easel, and I was sitting on the windowsill on the outside. And he started laughing, and he said, calm down. I know who you are. Mrs. Bush has told me. And he said, I just, I got in from the office, and I work right down over there. It's called the Oval Office. And he has an amazing sense of humor and is a fabulous guy. He ended up contacting me about a year later and asked me if I would consider doing a series of paintings of his ranch in Crawford, one of each season, that he could give to Mrs. Bush as a present. And so over the span of about 3.5 or 4 years, I was able to spend a great deal of time with him. And he has become, he's very interested in painting. I don't think he gives nearly enough credit of his dedication and how serious he takes it. And we just received his Christmas card at the end of last week, and he has gotten really, really, he's a serious painter.
He's working hard at it.
He takes it very seriously.
Working very hard at it.
I think it should be applauded. There's still, there's many people in the press that try to take a shot at him, but, for the most part, he was president, and I'm sure most of us agree that he made some mistakes in his presidency, which in hindsight are easy to judge him. In the course of the action, it's not quite so, I think it's a little, needs to be remembered that, a lot of the information that he had at the time, he was making his best decisions. But the fact that he was president, he stayed out of the political arena, and that he's taken something, and anybody, whether any part of your life that you find a new love and passion that you can dedicate the rest of your life to, should be nothing but applauded. And from his early work, the first couple paintings that I saw, to the pieces that I saw this spring when I last saw him, are night and day difference. And he, through hard work, determination, and just sheer effort and interest, he's become a damn good painter.
We've invited him to the Figurative Art Convention and Expo through his brother, who got our invitation to him because he likes painting portraits and figures. And we, of course, have also invited him to the PleinAir Convention. So maybe one day he'll show up and we'll all go painting together. Well, you will enjoy his company if you do. He's a remarkable human being. So any final thoughts, because we're kind of wrapping up on episode 2. Final thoughts of anything you want to share with people? Eric, I'm not sure. This whole process, the creative process, is not easy, nor should it be. So if you're starting out, or whether you're a seasoned professional, don't get discouraged. Realize that the struggle is an essential part of it. I think always, I like to try to approach it where the final painting is just the kind of happenstance of it. That if I can learn something new on each painting, then I feel that I'm continuing to grow. The other thing I would, whether you're starting or, whether you're a professional, give yourself a chance to explore. For the last 7 years, I've had at least one thing in my studio that is just an experiment. And it could be as simple as a new canvas, or a new pencil that I haven't found, a new color, or a whole new way of applying paint, or something that is not meant to be seen or to be viewed by the public. Sometimes they work out. Sometimes they can be really exciting, and they make a leap forward. But I always have something going that I've never done before, and it keeps me fresh. It allows me that wonderful feeling of when we first start. There's nothing still after 40 years of painting. There's nothing more enjoyment than just playing in the paint, and to give yourself time just to play in the paint, to experiment, where we allow ourselves time for failure, where you're not always under the gun with a deadline or a commitment to an exhibition or a show, but where you can just get back to that fundamental enjoyment of just mixing paint. And that's really what the color charts were for me, and failure, because we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes. Absolutely. Or any awards that we win. Well, Tim, this has been fabulous having you on 2 episodes of the PleinAir Podcast, first time in history. So congratulations. and thank you. I think we could probably go for a third, and maybe we will at some point in the future. But I really appreciate your time today. I've greatly enjoyed, Eric. Always
whether it's spending time directly with you or conversations in the past, spending time when I was in Austin, I enjoy it. You always, you're a wonderful interviewer, and your interest and curiosity, I think, has allowed you to do what you've done, which is brought the art world and painting to thousands and thousands of people.
Well, you're very kind.
And so, thank you. I hope you have a good editor. I feel a lot of times I get carried away and I just babble and carry on. And
oh no, we're not going to edit.
I apologize for that. This is not going to be
every word
easy
was
job.
golden. Every word was golden. Thanks again to T. Allen Lawson. This has been a two-parter. This has been the second part, and it's just been an honor to have him on the show. He's such a nice man. He's very humble. What a great painter, too. And so it's been one of the great pleasures of my life getting to know him. It's just such a gentleman and such a great inspiration to everybody, including myself. Well, you guys ready for some marketing ideas?
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
In the Marketing Minute, I try to answer your art marketing questions. And of course, they've been submitted by you. Email your questions, eric@artmarketing.com. Try to tell me where you're from. I don't use last names usually, but I like to say where you're from. This one's from Bernie in New Jersey. So Bernie says, I'm working on a show that is coming up in about a year from now. It's my first solo show. Congratulations, Bernie. That's cool. And I want it to be a success, but I'm wondering what I can do now to make sure it's a success. Any ideas? Bernie, sometimes the best things come from the best questions, and you're asking the right question. What can I do now? You don't want this to be a last-minute thought to try to fix something that's not happening at the last minute. It's like holding a wedding and then not sending out the invitations, right? I mean, you're having an event, but if you build it, they won't come. You have to make sure they come. You have to make sure that you really make people aware of it and talk about it all the time and make sure that you're repeating it all the time because people forget. And otherwise, if you don't do that, it's a waste of time and energy to do a show at all. So I would suggest a few things. First, you want to plant seeds early. I'd get some little cards made up, business cards about the show, have your information, hand them out, have a big thing that says save the date. Use one image from the show and then hand them out all year, a year in advance. Got a show coming up in a year. And then every time you see somebody, just bring it up. It's okay. They'll think you're a little bit annoying, but that's okay. Now, the other thing is that you need impressions. You need several impressions. You see, everything needs impressions. You're planting seeds over and over and over again. So, you'd email out a save to the date notice and maybe a graphic about the show in advance to your list. If you haven't got a list, start building a list now and collect business cards from people who might want to come. And that way you can have continuous notices in front of them. Talk about it in your newsletter. Talk about it in everything you do. Tell them to get it in their calendar, and then one thing you can do is you can automate the calendar, so all they have to do is click on a link and it'll drop it in their calendar for them, and that way it's there. They've saved the date. Next, I'd hit up social media, talk about it at least twice a month for a year, and more mentions 30 days before. You want to really amplify before the event. And of course, you can post teaser images, but don't show the whole thing. Josh LaRock recently did a show, and he showed little pieces of images, not the whole thing. That way you wanted to come and see the show and see what they look like. I'd start buying ads a year in advance. Now, I wouldn't necessarily place them a year in advance, but get them bought. You can buy ads on newsletters, and sometimes you have to get those ads way in advance to get the dates you want. Also, same thing with ads in magazines. Hit places that have art buying collectors you need, like Fine Art Connoisseur or even PleinAir that reaches the PleinAir collectors. And then remember that frequency sells. People want things when they see it more. Repetition helps. Do it 2 to 3 times at least in issues before a show. Most people just buy one ad and they don't get the results they want. But if you buy an ad and then people go, oh yeah, I should pay attention to that. And then they buy another one and then you're getting their notice and more likely to get them. And you want the people who have the money, which are the collectors typically. More times they see it, the more important they think it is. I'd also recommend, this is something nobody does, but I would try to get a star guest. if you know somebody or happen to, wouldn't it be cool to say, I'm going to have Brad Pitt or Jennifer Aniston or somebody like that for my ribbon cutting. Everybody will come. Everybody will come. They want to see them. They want to get their picture taken with them. Whatever you can do to draw people. And if you have somebody that that would help you out, or maybe you meet somebody, or sometimes you can reach out. I have friends who have actually purchased celebrities for events. Sometimes there are people who do it for $5,000 or $6,000, and that's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money for some events. And they'll come to a charity event and that might be B-lister stars that aren't famous anymore, but were once famous, and that's okay. Get people to a show to help. You also want to get critical acclaim before a show. That means you want to try to get reviews, get articles before the show so that people are talking about it. People go in and see it beforehand and they see the work, and you want them talking about it. The bottom line is talk it up for a year. Increase the mentions in the last 30 days as reminders. Mention it everywhere, your newsletter, everything you do, bring attention to it the last 30 days. And then send out reminders the week of, the day of, the day before, even the evening of, because people intend to come, but they sometimes forget. Get those reminders out to them. And it's okay to say, hey, do you mind if I send you some reminders? Most people say yes, it's okay. Next question comes from Emil, or Emil, I'm not sure which it is, in Maine. Eric, one of my friends is a pretty famous artist who has always made a great living selling art, yet his sales have come to a stop the last couple of years. He's had a really rough couple of years, and he thinks it's over. He thinks nobody's buying art anymore. Is it over? Well, Emil, I don't think it's over at all. As a matter of fact, I had dinner with an artist recently, and he told me the same thing happened to him. He racked his brain, and he was thinking, well, art just must not be selling because I've consistently sold art. And he started deciding that maybe he's the problem. He wanted to blame everybody else. He wanted to blame the galleries. He wanted to blame the art business. He wanted to blame the economy. Well, the economy's good. He wanted to blame the presidential elections. He wanted to blame everything. And then he realized, well, he needs to stop blaming everybody and just find a solution himself. And the conclusion he came to was that he's been painting the same way and the same subjects forever. So he started playing and experimenting more, and he really made his paintings different. And he started having more fun. He was less bored. He was more energized, and it showed in his work. You see, if you're bored, it shows in your work. And if you're doing the same thing you've always done, everybody's like, well, he or she hasn't done anything lately that's new and interesting. So out of the blue, he started selling everything again. Everything was selling because he was energizing his work. So don't blame others. Don't blame the economy. Don't blame the election. Don't blame the galleries. Now, I know people who this past year sold more art than they have in the history of their careers. And I know galleries that have done the same thing. I have others who tell me they're struggling, they haven't sold anything, and they think everything's over. It's not over. You have to take personal responsibility. You have to tell yourself, I'm going to do whatever it takes, as long as it's ethical and legal. I'm going to do everything that it takes to make sure that I sell the amount of art that I need to sell. Take personal responsibility. If you have to fire a gallery, get a new one. If you have to reinvent yourself, if you have to try new things, try new advertising, try different approaches, you got to have fun. You got to be out there. You got to be doing marketing. You got to message things. A lot of artists are kind of stuck in the past, and they want to do things the way things have always been done. Yet this is a new world. Things are done differently today than they were 5 years ago, even 10 years ago, or even 1 year ago in some ways. So get unstuck, shake everything up, and have some fun, and you'll find it'll make a big difference. Also, we forget that some of the things that we worked really hard on when we were starting our careers, we were doing lots more shows, we were doing lots more energy, lots more promotion, we were talking to more people, we were out there, banging on doors, and then we get money, we get comfortable, we stop doing all that stuff. Go back to the basics. What have you forgotten to do that you should be doing? When we're marketing things, we get so close to it, sometimes we forget to tell people things they need to know because we assume they know. Don't assume anybody knows who you are. If you haven't been selling work for a couple of years, there's a whole bunch of new collectors in the market who don't know you exist, even though you may have been famous. So think about that. Anyway, I hope that helps, Emil. And that has been the Marketing Minute.
This has been the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads. You can learn more at artmarketing.com.
Be sure to hold on to your seats for the PleinAir convention. I mean, hold on to them, yes, but also get them. Make sure you get them because we're running low. And check out the value specs, glasses for painting perfect values. You can find them at paintbynote.com. And you find the convention at pleinairconvention.com. And you can find my blog, Sunday Coffee, at coffeewitheric.com. You can get a free subscription. Check it out. I talk about art, life, and all kinds of other stuff randomly, but it's kind of fun for me to do. And this is also fun, doing the PleinAir Podcast. I enjoy it. So let's do it again sometime like next week. I'll see you then. My name is Eric Rhoads. Bye.
This has been the PleinAir Podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhoads. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.